glazed donut, how it's shiny on the outside. Ceramic glaze is like that, but for pottery. Instead of sugar, glaze is made out of glass, minerals, and colors. When the pottery goes into a really hot oven called a kiln, the glaze melts just like a donut glaze, making it shiny and colorful. And just like a baker carefully measures ingredients to make the glaze perfect, we do the same for pottery. It's basically science. Glazing pottery has been around for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians, around 1500 years ago, used a special glaze called faience. They mixed minerals to make it shiny and colorful, just like we do today. Here you're looking at some artwork created by former students at our school. You'll notice that glaze comes in all different colors. Oh, and speaking of colors, glaze can be tricky. The color you see when you paint it on doesn't always match the final result. Let me show you the best example of this. This glaze looks blue now, but once it's fired in the kiln, you might be surprised to learn it turns into a clear, transparent finish. Great job! You did it! Now that you've learned all about glaze, it's time to go over the rules of glazing. The first rule of glazing is don't waste a drop. Glaze might look and act like ordinary paint, but as you've just learned, it's made with glass, so it's pretty expensive. A small jar of glaze can easily cost over $20. And when you think about needing all the colors and the whole school using it, the cost adds up fast. So please don't paint on your newspaper, and if you accidentally drip a little, that's okay. Please just be mindful of how lucky we are to have such an amazing resource. The second rule of glazing your ceramic piece is don't paint the bottom. Here's why. Glaze is made out of glass, and when we put your art into the kiln, it gets really hot, about 1800 degrees, which is close to how hot a volcano can get. Imagine the glaze turning into molten lava. If the molten glaze gets between your art and the kiln's shelf, it's going to stick there forever when it cools down. I've even heard true stories of artists having to break their artwork out of the kiln with a hammer. But don't worry, if you accidentally get a little bit of glaze on the bottom, it's no problem. We can get a sponge and wipe it off. The third rule of glazing is glaze it 3 times. Now, what's a coat? Each time you paint a layer of glaze on your piece, that's called a coat. The important thing is that you must let each layer dry before painting the next one. If you don't, you're kind of just pushing the wet glaze around instead of building up nice, even layers. First, let's look at this picture. See this shiny glass head of this little critter? This is a great example of what 3 layers of glaze looks like. It's smooth and glassy. Next, let's take a look at this side of the piece. This one has 2 layers of glaze. It's nice, but it's not as thick and glassy as the first one we saw, right? Here's the other example on this same piece. This spot only has 1 coat of glaze. You can see it's just not as shiny and smooth as the other sections. Also, make sure you cover the whole piece. Don't miss any tiny spots. You have to think in 3D and check your work like an inspector. Look at it from every possible angle to make sure it's fully glazed. I have one last tip for you. Glaze Day is one of the most exciting days of the whole school year. Sometimes when we get excited, we tend to move around more quickly. I'd like to remind you of two important things. Move cautiously and be mindful of your movements. You don't want to accidentally bump into somebody else's work. When you're carrying your artwork, use two hands to avoid any chance of dropping it or breaking it. Once clay breaks, it can't ever fully be repaired. Let's go over the important rules for glazing. Rule number 1, don't waste a drop. Glaze is expensive. Rule number 2, don't paint the bottom. Remember, glaze is like molten lava. If it touches the shelf, your piece will stick forever. 3, glaze it 3 times. Let each coat dry before adding the next. Don't forget to check your artwork from every angle. Think in 3 dimensions to make sure you cover the whole thing. 4, be careful. Move cautiously, avoid bumping into others, and carry your artwork with 2 hands to prevent accidents. Now let's go get some newspaper under your area. Remember, enjoy the process and have fun working on your creation.